lived. 3 people were killed and several more seriously wounded in Tuesday's attack. From Strasbourg, Gavin Lee reports.
This is the suburb of Strasbourg where police ended the 48-hour manhunt of Cherif Chekatt. This quiet district of Neudorf is the same place the suspected gunman was last seen on Tuesday night after escaping following the attack close to the city's Christmas markets, which killed 3 people and injured 12 others. Eyewitnesses say they heard gunfire as the police moved in.
We left McDonald's and I wanted to go home because it was late, but when we arrived at the tram station we were stopped by the police and we heard gunshots, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, and we've been stuck here since. I don't know how to get home.
It was here at the Christmas markets in Strasbourg, the oldest and most famous in France, where the attack was carried out. Police say Cherif Chekatt was carrying a pistol and a knife, shooting and stabbing people in the streets as others ran for their lives. Chekatt is said to have been confronted by soldiers patrolling the markets who shot him in the arm, though he escaped by taxi, ordering the driver to take him to the Neudorf area, 15 minutes drive south of the city. There was a second exchange of gunfire with police, though he escaped, been seen since. 29-year-old Cherif Chekatt was born in Strasbourg from an Algerian family. He had a long criminal past, 27 convictions for crimes but not related to terrorism. Authorities say he became radicalized in prison and was placed on a terrorism watch list, amongst those being monitored for extremist rhetoric. The French Interior Minister says the discovery of the suspect came about after a chance tip-off from a member of the public.
Un équipage de la brigade spécialisée de terrain.
A team from the Specialised Field Brigade, composed of 3 officers from the National Police, spotted an individual who matched the description of the person wanted. And as the police intervened to arrest him, he turned around, faced the officers and started shooting. They then immediately retaliated and neutralised the attacker.
Now the police units here are starting to lift the cordon and move away from the scene, but forensic teams are still around 200 yards from here, verifying whether the body of the suspect is that of Cherif Chekatt. And here people who are waiting to go back inside after the operation. The residents speak of fear but also speak of sheer relief that the incident, this 48-hour manhunt, is finally over. Gavin Lee, BBC News, Strasbourg.
Leaders of the remaining 27 European Union countries are saying they do not want to keep the UK tied to their rules indefinitely after Brexit through the so-called backstop designed to prevent a hard border on the island of Ireland. After meeting in Brussels, they said they would work to conclude a future trade deal with the UK as soon as possible, but they ruled out any renegotiation of the withdrawal agreement. Kevin Connolly has this report from Brussels.
The Prime Minister turned up to Brussels in the mood to manage expectations of what might be possible at this summit. On her way into the meeting, where she was to appeal directly to her fellow EU leaders for concessions to help her sell her deal at Westminster, her message was that there's plenty of work still to be done.
My focus now is on ensuring that I can get those assurances that we need to get this deal over the line, because I genuinely believe it's in the best interests of both sides, the UK and the EU.
The text of Mrs May's appeal, though, released after the evening's talks ended, hinted at a rather passionate and personal address. Let's get this right, she was reported to have told her fellow leaders. Let's hold nothing in reserve. She stressed that a no-deal Brexit was in no one's interests and said she hoped she'd prove that they could trust her to do what was right, not what was easy. She told the leaders that they had to change the perception that the Irish border backstop was a trap from which the UK couldn't escape. The EU leaders' formal response was to emphasise the backstop's temporary nature. But the President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, warned that Westminster was not the only parliament whose approval was required.
And I would like to tell our British friends that of course we need the yes of the House of Commons, but we need also the yes of the European Parliament. Both parliaments are important. The one is continental, the other is insular. But the two have the same importance.
So far, at least, there's nothing in that public response from the EU that answers Theresa May's call for help. But this negotiation is, of course, not finished yet. Kevin Connolly, BBC News, Brussels.
Let's give you a quick roundup of some of the other main news to keep you up to date. The Irish Prime Minister, Leo Varadkar, has hailed as a historic moment for women the passing of a bill to legalise abortion in Ireland. It's been approved now by both houses of Parliament. It comes into effect in January. Second night of protests against new Hungarian laws on working conditions and the judiciary. There were some clashes between demonstrators and police outside Parliament, which had approved the measures on Wednesday. The Electoral Commission in the Democratic Republic of Congo has confirmed 8,000 electronic voting machines have been destroyed in a blaze at one of its buildings in Kinshasa. That's 2/3 of those that are needed for the capital 10 days before presidential elections. Perhaps for the first time in his presidency, there was a surprising degree of caution in Donald Trump's tweets as he wrote back from the earlier vitriol he had flung at his former attorney, Michael Cohen, now, of course, sentenced to 3 years in jail. He said Michael Cohen did nothing wrong with respect to campaign finance laws, even if they applied. Perhaps he could feel the dementors of Robert Mueller's investigations swirling around. John Sweeney assesses where Michael Cohen's conviction leaves Donald Trump.
For 12 years, Michael Cohen was not just a lawyer for Donald Trump, he was his pit bull. But now he's done a deal with the FBI, and tonight the president is seething.
I never directed him to do anything wrong. Whatever he did on his own. He's a lawyer.
This week, Cohen was sentenced to 3 years in jail. He told the court his weakness was a blind loyalty to Donald Trump and that he felt it was my duty to cover up his dirty deeds. Trump must now fear his old watchdog. He's vulnerable on 3 fronts. The first, his contacts with the Russian mob. Trump was cozy with this man, Russian-born former gangster Felix Sater. In early 2016, Sater tempted the Donald with the possibility of Russian finance for a Trump Tower in Moscow. Cohen told Congress that the Moscow project died early in 2016. That was a big fat lie. Cohen has now admitted that the Moscow project ran until the summer of 2016 and that he lied to Congress. On this, Cohen could potentially destroy his old master.
It's really significant because Trump is a front runner in the summer of 2016 for the Republican nomination, yet at the same time he and his entourage are conducting negotiations to secure a prime piece of property in downtown Moscow. And such property cannot be secured without high-level approval from the Kremlin.
The second front, what Cohen knows about Trump and an agent for the GRU, Russia's military intelligence. This is Konstantin Kilimnik. The FBI say he's a GRU spy. He's been charged in absentia with obstructing justice. In 2016, he worked with Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was running Trump's campaign. Here again, Cohen could cause his old boss no end of pain.
Kilimnik is reputedly a former member of the Russian military security service. But in Russia, nobody is ever a former member of the security service. They always are attached to the service. And he had close relationships with Manafort while Manafort was serving as a campaign advisor to Trump. Therefore, these relationships between Manafort and the intelligence service of Russia look highly suspicious.
The third danger is what Cohen knows about Trump's women. The president denies having affairs with both porn star Stormy Daniels and former Playboy model Karen McDougal. Prosecutors say Cohen ponied up $130,000 for Stormy and fixed a $150,000 payoff to Karen to gag their mouths with gold. They say Cohen did so on behalf of individual one, Trump. Cohen says Trump ordered the hush money and he taped the calls. Colluding with all the Kremlin's men, that may not bring down Trump, but gagging the porn star and the model, watch this space.
John Sweeney reporting there, adding perhaps to Mr. Trump's pain, there are reports that federal prosecutors are investigating whether his inaugural committee misspent some of the tens of millions of dollars it raised from donors. They're examining whether some of the committee's donors gave money in exchange for policy concessions influencing administration positions or access to the incoming administration. Our correspondent Dan Johnson is in Washington, D.C. right now. Dan, tell us more.
Yes, it sounds like the White House, Donald Trump's presidency, could face another investigation, this time into the celebrations, the events that were built up around his inauguration back at the start of 2017. So this was the committee that was put together to organise the parties, the dinners, the concerts, everything that was around the official inauguration celebration. And they raised more than $100 million. Now that's more than twice what Barack Obama raised for his initial inauguration parties. So there has been questions about who was giving that money, what they were giving that money for, and what they may have expected in return. Was it just an invite to the dinner, or did they expect favours back from the president once he was in office, or extra access to him either at the inauguration or during his time in the Oval Office? Now, this has all come out in a Wall Street Journal report that's been published this evening, but there are conflicting reports back from the people involved in that organisation committee. The committee's issued a statement that says it was in full compliance with all applicable laws and that it's not aware of any pending investigations and hasn't been contacted by prosecutors. The organisers on that committee say they're simply not aware of any evidence of an investigation. And Sarah Sanders, the White House spokesman, was asked about this as well. She put distance between the committee and the president. She said this had nothing to do with the president at that time. His focus was all on the transition. He had nothing to do with the arrangements for the celebrations.
Yeah, it's reported, isn't it, that this inquiry arises out of material seized from Michael Cohen's office. It's quite a list now, isn't it? As somebody pointed out today, one journalist, under criminal investigation currently the Trump campaign, the transition, the administration itself, the Trump Organization, the Trump Foundation, and now the inauguration as well. This was not what the businessman signed up for when he decided to run for president.
No, it doesn't exactly feel like draining the swamp, does it, when there are so many investigations into so many different issues. Now, President Trump again and again repeats on Twitter, especially in relation to Robert Mueller's investigation into the allegations of Russia collusion, witch hunt. That is the president's repeated message, and he has deflected time and again all these investigations, all these questions, but they keep coming. There are more and more issues to be examined, and there are more and more people who've turned against the president, like his former lawyer Michael Cohen, and are now cooperating with prosecutors. How much more evidence are they able to give? We know that this latest investigation, if indeed it is going ahead, has come out of documents, recordings that Michael Cohen had kept, secret recordings we expect that the president won't have known about. How much more evidence is that? Where else does that lead? How many more investigations could that spark? And where are these investigations going to lead eventually? We still don't have a conclusion to Robert Mueller's investigation. We're waiting for that, and there are so many more questions still to be answered.
Dan, thank you very much. Thanks to you for being with us. Stay with us if you can. Much more to come on BBC News, including this. It could be a film set, but these women are being put to a very different use to capture the history of England's most famous river.
After 8 months on the run, Saddam Hussein has been tracked down and captured by American forces.
Saddam Hussein is finished because he killed our people, our women, our children.
The signatures took only a few minutes, but they brought a formal end to 3.5 years of conflict. Conflict that has claimed more than 200,000 lives. Before an audience of world leaders, the presidents of Bosnia, Serbia and Croatia put their names to the peace agreement.
The Romanian border was sealed and silent today. Romania has cut itself off from the outside world in order to prevent the details of the presumed massacre in Timișoara from leaking out.
From sex at the White House to a trial for his political life, the Lewinsky affair tonight guaranteed Bill Clinton his place in history as only the second president ever to be impeached.
Very good to have you with us on BBC News. The latest headlines for you. French police say they have killed the gunman who shot dead 3 people near a Christmas market in Strasbourg. The European Union is saying it will not renegotiate the Brexit deal as Theresa May seeks assurances in Brussels over the controversial backstop. The US Senate has backed a resolution to end military support for the Saudi-led war in Yemen. The vote is likely to prove largely symbolic, but it defies President Trump and underlines the anger in Congress over the murder of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Senators also supported a joint statement holding the Saudi Crown Prince responsible for the killing. Here's our State Department correspondent, Barbara Plett-Usher.
The fact that the Senate has voted doesn't mean that military support for the Yemen war will end, because it's just the Senate. It would have to go through further hurdles to actually become law, and then the President could ultimately veto it. But the point of this resolution is that it's the first time that the Congress has invoked what's called the War Powers Act, which means it's the first time they've voted to withdraw U.S. forces from a foreign conflict on the grounds that it's Congress who should approve this move. The President doesn't really have the authority to do so. That's an historic moment, actually, and it just shows how angry senators are about the human cost of this war. And it also shows that they're quite angry with the Saudis, who are the ones who are leading the campaign.
Now, ahead of that Senate vote Barbara was just talking about, the warring parties in Yemen agreed a ceasefire for the port city of Hodeidah. It'll take effect on Friday. It could prove a lifeline for nearly two-thirds of the population. Yemen is in the grip of the world's most serious humanitarian crisis. And the pause in fighting has raised hopes that the deal sponsored by the UN could lead to a wider peace agreement. This report from our special correspondent, Nawala Magafi.
These are the faces of the world's worst humanitarian crisis. In this makeshift camp in northern Yemen, civilians have escaped the violence, but not its consequences. Without any money, this is what Jabir will feed her family today: a handful of leaves. We have nothing else to eat, she says. No aid agencies have come here. Her husband told us they've lost everything in the fighting. Their children are hungry, they have no money, and he can't see how things will get better. Nearby, a mother holds her son up. Critically ill, she can't get the medicine he needs. This is what the people here fled from. For months, fighting around the city of Hodeidah has intensified. Bombs dropping almost every day. Hundreds have died. It severely damaged the port that's been controlled by Houthi rebels since 2014 and is a lifeline for food supplies for the whole of Yemen. The coalition say the rebels have been using it to offload arms, but the blockade and fighting around this port has crippled the entire country, with millions facing famine. But today in Sweden, a glimmer of hope. The warring parties shake hands after agreeing to a UN proposal that could bring the battle for the port to an end.
You have reached an agreement on Hodeidah port and city, which will see a mutual redeployment of forces from the port and the city, and the establishment of a governorate-wide ceasefire. The UN will play a leading role in the ports, and this will facilitate the humanitarian access and the flow of goods to the civilian population.
Back in Yemen, news of the deal celebration by the Houthi rebels. But after months of intense fighting in Hodeidah and many broken ceasefires, the question is whether this time the warring parties really will put down their weapons. But with international pressure from the UK and its allies, along with the United Nations playing a leading role, there is more optimism. Optimism and hope that the people of Yemen are desperate for. Nawala Magafi, BBC News.
A Russian woman accused of being an agent for the Kremlin has pleaded guilty to conspiracy. US prosecutors say Maria Butina tried to infiltrate the National Rifle Association to influence American policy towards Russia. She denied the allegations at first, but has now agreed to work with investigators looking into Russian attempts to interfere in American politics. Gary O'Donoghue has the story.
Maria Butina first came to the United States back in 2015. She's a gun rights activist from Siberia, and she started to develop connections with the National Rifle Association here. She also befriended a man, Paul Erickson, who's a Republican operative, pretty well connected, and they started a relationship together. And what the prosecutors say is that after that, Maria Butina started to develop a plan to make connections with influential people in American politics in order to further Russia's national interest. She used Paul Erickson to help her do that, and she made a number of meetings and arrangements to do just that. She actually asked a question of President Trump at a press conference back in 2015, asking him whether or not he would lift sanctions against Russia if he became president. Now, up until now, she's pleaded not guilty to the charges she's faced, which are working as a foreign agent and conspiracy charges. But now she's changed that plea to guilty. She will be sentenced at a later date, and she's agreed to cooperate with investigators. This is not part of Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian collusion, an alleged Russian collusion with the Trump campaign, but it is part of this mosaic that intelligence services and prosecutors here believe the Russians have been putting in place to try and influence American politics.
Gary O'Donoghue for us there. The latest test flight by Sir Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic has reached 82 kilometres above the Earth, the closest it's got so far to the edge of space. Here is video from the VSS Unity. For 10 years, the British entrepreneur has been trying to introduce a commercial civilian astronaut service. If it's eventually cleared to carry passengers, it's likely to be competing with the Amazon billionaire Jeff Bezos. Test flights by his rocket system are already reaching the altitude of space. Still, it is a milestone for the Branson programme.
So the spaceship, which is right behind me, I don't know if you can see it, is attached to a mothership, it's a giant aeroplane that we built. It is taken up to about 40,000 feet. The spaceship is then dropped from the mothership. It fires its rocket. It goes from 0 to 3,000 miles an hour in 7 to 8 seconds straight up. We all had the most fantastic view of this happening here from the Mojave today. And then, when it's in space, it suddenly it's not moving anymore. People unbuckle their seats and they float around and they look out of these big windows that are in the spaceship.
Very much down to earth. For centuries, artists and photographers have used the River Thames in London as a subject of their work. Well, one artist is now recreating specific moments in the history of the Thames in striking images. Wendy Harrell explains all.
It could be a whimsical oil painting, but look again. This is actually a photograph. The artist is recreating historical stories from the River Thames.
My work is very cinematic, it's very lit. I use a lot of special effects like haze and smoke machines to create the smog that used to exist in London.
And they're not manipulated and doctored in post-production. This is how she does it. Huge scenes are set up on the shore, complete with period costumes, props and professional hair and makeup.
You can't just turn up on the foreshore and just create a shoot. I need permission from the Port of London Authority. There's a lot of health and safety issues because you can get Lyme's disease if you touch the water. There's syringes in the water. The tide is a huge problem.
The Thames is awash with intriguing stories, like the beluga whale that sparked huge public interest recently, or the northern bottlenose that created almost a hysteria 12 years ago, but sadly died in our attempts to set it free, a little like one of Julia's subjects.
The way of the world in wartime is very strange, and it might be said that the ways of women are strange too.
She's also interested in untold stories. It was only recently that Waterloo Bridge has been thought of as the Ladies' Bridge. The project started one weekend when she and her family went mudlarking on the Thames shore.
My first scene that I actually created was of mudlarker children, because in the Victorian era, the poorest of the poor would actually go mudlarking at low tide to find coal, metal, anything that they could sell to just survive.
There are more photographs planned. The next is a recreation of the frost fairs when the Thames used to be covered in ice. For that one, though, she'll be sticking to her studio. Wendy Hurrell, BBC London News.
Sounds like we'll be back to that story. There's much more on all the news anytime on the BBC website for you. You can reach me and most of the team on Twitter. I'm at BBC Mike Embley. Thank you for watching.
Hello. Thursday brought us a cold and a frosty day across many parts of the country, but there was some blue sky and some sunshine. This picture was taken by one of our weather watchers in Wiltshire, and I think Friday morning will dawn on a very similar note. Again, it will be a cold and a frosty start to the day with sub-zero temperatures first thing. Plenty of spells of sunshine for many of us through the course of the day to compensate for that fairly chilly start. But temperatures are fairly widely will be below freezing. It won't be quite as cold in the west, particularly for Northern Ireland, where we've got a little bit more cloud first thing Friday morning, keeping temperatures around 4 or 5 degrees. After that cold, frosty start, for many of us, it will be a decent, dry-looking day. Always a bit more cloud for Northern Ireland, with a chance of a few showers at times too. Perhaps just 1 or 2 showers around some of these exposed eastern coasts, particularly for eastern Scotland, northeast England. Could even be a wintry flurry down across East Anglia and the southeast. But for the vast majority of people, you'll miss those showers, and temperatures for most of us around 4 to 7 degrees. Then into Friday evening, we see the cloud bringing more outbreaks of rain to parts of Northern Ireland and the west of Scotland too. Eastern areas keeping in that cold air, so you can see the blue colours later on through Friday and then on into Saturday. But some milder air just waiting in the wings here out towards the southwest. That'll be drawn in on this weather front. So a bit of a change in conditions as we head through into the weekend as a frontal system works in from the west. It'll bring not only that milder air but also some outbreaks of rain, which will for some of us turn to snow. So Saturday, things are turning pretty wet and windy. Some fairly heavy snow and also some ice across Scotland and northern England, combined with some strong winds too. So there could be some travel disruption through the day on Saturday as this weather front bumps into that cold air. You can see the snow across parts of northern England and Scotland too. Could be about 10 to 20 centimetres across central parts of Scotland, even more over the higher ground, 2 to 5 centimetres across parts of northern England. Now it will turn back to rain south across the country where we've got some slightly milder air working in, but you'll really notice the strength of those winds. It will feel around -4 degrees there in Hull. For Northern Ireland, you've got the slightly milder air moving in, so any early snow turning back to rain, but some heavy snow across Scotland could be quite problematic through the day on Saturday. That rain-snow mix slowly easing away towards the east as we head through into the second half of the weekend, but we keep that pretty chilly wind coming in from the west. So although things will turn milder through the day on Sunday, most of those heavy and wintry showers should ease away too. Bye-bye.
Some days of the week are just different. Your tech, apps and gadget knowledge. Click this weekend on the BBC News Channel.
Just see one set of glistening little eyes looking up. We're being swallowed by a giant luminous jellyfish.
They're just tears of pure joy because it is so beautiful.
Oh, aren't they gorgeous? Grizzly Bear Cubs and Me starts Tuesday at 9 on BBC Two.
Latest headlines for you from BBC News. French police have shot dead the gunman who killed 3 people at a Christmas market in Strasbourg. Sharif Chakat was spotted on a street not far from where he lived and opened fire on armed officers when they intercepted him. He was killed when they returned fire. He'd been on the run since Tuesday evening. Britain's Prime Minister has urged European Union members to help salvage her Brexit deal, but leaders have said they will not renegotiate. Theresa May has been seeking assurances over the controversial Irish border backstop. She survived a no-confidence vote earlier this week. President Trump has denied directing his former personal lawyer to break the law and says he had no ties to his crimes. Michael Cohen has been sentenced to 3 years in prison for crimes he claims the president told him to commit. about 2:30 in the morning. You're up to date on the headlines. It's time now for Thursday in Parliament.
Hello again and welcome to Thursday in Parliament. In this programme, MPs take stock after that vote of confidence.
It's the morning after the night before, and as the hangovers start to kick in, they'll all be asking themselves, just what on earth did we get up to last night?
Ministers celebrate Theresa May's victory.
And that means she won that vote by a significant majority.
And an outbreak of modesty in the House of Lords.
It is not a matter for a junior minister to...
All that to come and more, but first, it was a night when more than a third of Conservative MPs said they had no confidence in Theresa May. But having won the vote, the Prime Minister headed for Brussels to seek more concessions over her Brexit deal. Back at Westminster, MPs tried hard to find out when they'd finally get a meaningful vote on it after the decision to postpone the debate and vote. When Andrea Leadsom, the Leader of the House, outlined next week's schedule, there was no sign of it, something spotted by her Labour shadow.
I don't know if I've heard properly. Has the leader actually given all the business next week? Because I didn't hear when the debate on the meaningful vote will resume. It's obviously not listed for next week, so when will it come back?
She said the government could no longer be trusted.
Even now, the Prime Minister, having made an agreement with the EU, is saying she will go back and find another way. The government spent money, ministers spread out around the country, when the people they had to convince were here in Parliament. What did the government do? Not listen to Parliament. In fact, the government told Parliament to shut up.
The government will bring the debate and vote back to the House at the latest by the 21st of January. And in answer to her question about the Prime Minister, she will understand it is precisely, the Prime Minister came to this House to make a statement to say precisely that it's because she is listening to the debate that's taking place in this House that she is going back to the EU to recognise that honourable members require reassurances, not just reassurances, but legally binding reassurances that we cannot be trapped in a backstop permanently. And that's what the Prime Minister is seeking to do. So honourable members should rest assured the Prime Minister is very much seeking to address the concerns that have been expressed by this House.
It's the morning after the night before, and as the hangovers start to kick in, they'll all be asking themselves, just what on earth did we get up to last night? As they survey the wreckage of their night of mayhem, we now find that we have a Prime Minister who only has the confidence of 200 members of this House. A lame duck Prime Minister who would give waterfowl with walking sticks a bad name. A third of her party don't want her to lead them. Her credibility is in shatters, her ability to lead gone forever. Mr Speaker, the main item of business next week should be a motion of no confidence in this rotten, divided government. They are there for the taking, divided, wounded, unable to govern. And I've got no idea what the Labour Party are waiting for. We could be shut of them pretty soon. So if they're not going to put in a motion of no confidence in this government, it will be left to the other opposition parties of this House.
The Prime Minister won 63% of the vote, and that was against 37% who didn't support her, and that means she won that vote by a significant majority. In June 2016, this House decided to ask the people whether we should leave the EU or remain within it. 52% said we should leave, and 48% said we should remain. That leave one, and that's why we're leaving the EU, just for his information. And then he will recall that in Scotland there was a vote on whether Scotland should leave the United Kingdom or not, and 55% voted to stay in, 45% voted to leave. That means a majority voted to stay in the United Kingdom. I hope that explains to him what a democratic vote is all about.
One of the Prime Minister's Conservative critics said he accepted the result.
But as the Prime Minister has said that she is going to the EU to secure significant and supposedly game-changing amendments to the withdrawal agreement with the EU, will the Leader of the House assure us that we will get a full debate back when that agreement comes back, that we won't just continue with the debate as we left it? And given how oversubscribed that debate was, can she assure us that that debate will therefore last for longer than 5 days?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend? I think his approach is exactly right. Even if he didn't support the Prime Minister, she won by a very clear majority, and it's absolutely right that he now supports her. He asks what the guaranteed amount of time will be. He will appreciate that the decision about that will depend on what the Prime Minister comes back with.
It's preposterous for us to delay endlessly the vote on what we're doing on Brexit. If we bump up against the 21st of January, that will mean that businesses in this country will be wasting time, energy and money worrying about whether there's going to be a no-deal situation. We need to get on with it. And I really say to the Leader of the House, please ditch all this business next week. Let's get on with the debate. Let's get on with making a decision. That's what Parliament's for, decisions.
Can I tell the Leader that kicking the can down the road is not a strategy for government, and waiting for the sword of Damocles to fall on people's homes, people's businesses, people's livelihoods and our NHS is completely unacceptable. She is deliberately pursuing a policy of running down the clock and spending taxpayers' money in order to blackmail Parliament into supporting her deal. Can I tell her now, it will not work?
She will realise that had we gone ahead with the vote, that this House was very unlikely to support the withdrawal agreement as it stood. So whilst she says, in not holding the vote, we are running down the clock, the actual point is that the Prime Minister listened to the views of the House and has now gone away urgently to seek changes that will mean the House can support that. In other words, to put something to the House that the House will support in the interests of the country.
And Downing Street said later that the meaningful vote would not take place before Christmas. Now, just before the no confidence vote, it emerged that two MPs who'd been suspended from the Conservatives' parliamentary party had the whip restored, allowing them to take part in that vote. Charlie Elphicke, the MP for Dover, and Andrew Griffiths, who represents Burton, have both been accused of inappropriate sexual conduct. The news prompted protests from Labour MPs.
She's so cute, so sweet, I can't wait to beat her. Can she take a beating? Not my words, Mr. Speaker, the words of the MP for Burton, while barraging two of his female constituents with thousands of sexual text messages. What message does this send about how any process here in this place can ever be trusted? Question, and also to answer me, what matters more, political power or protecting victims of sexual harassment and abuse?
There has been a process that has been undertaken. It has been a decision by the Chief Whip. It's not something that I have been privy to, but I absolutely assure all honourable and right honourable members that in establishing the independent complaints procedure, which is not involved with any party political processes whatsoever, that is designed to enable everybody who works or visits this place to be able to take any complaints that they have to an independent place for proper investigation and proper sanction to be applied.
I'm afraid the Leader's party yesterday lost any ounce of credibility in leading the investigations into sexual harassment and bullying in this place when they restored the whips to the members for Dover and Burton. And I'm afraid it is thoroughly implausible that it just so happened that their investigations concluded yesterday. How can we be assured that party politics are taken out of investigations into such allegations and out of crucial appointments to committees governing standards and privileges in this House?
Well, the Honourable Lady will be aware that all the parties across the House combined together to develop the independent complaints procedure. It was right that we did that, and one of the key reasons for doing it was to ensure that any complaints in future would not have to go down party political routes.
Andrea Leadsom. The Conservatives dropped action against Andrew Griffiths due to his mental health at the time, and Charlie Elphicke says he's confident he'll clear his name. Now, police forces in England and Wales are to get extra funding, which the policing minister said recognised the real pressure they were facing. But Labour has condemned the funding settlement for 2019 to 2020 as another real terms cut, with much of the money having to come from local taxpayers. In a statement, the minister said police forces would get more than £300 million in extra government grant, with local police and crime commissioners able to raise a further £500 million from council tax, at a cost of around £24 on the average bill.
In the reporting of higher harm, previously hidden crimes such as child sexual exploitation. The challenge from serious and organised crime networks is growing. Through the serious violence strategy, we are bearing down on the worst spike in serious violence and knife crime that we have seen in this country in a decade. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, this settlement combines increased central funding with increased local contributions to local policing. It enables the biggest investment in frontline policing since 2010 and the start of the journey to get this country back to living within our means. It will allow PCCs to manage their costs while maintaining their plans to recruit and fill capability gaps, not least detectives. It will strengthen our capabilities in the fight against serious organised crime and terrorism.
Labour accused ministers of having created a crisis in public safety.
There is simply no precedent in post-war history for a government to have undermined the police in the way this one has. No government in post-war history has ever slashed resources available to the police by as much as 30% and cut officers in every year it has been in office. Never since records began has violent crime been as high as it is today. Never has knife crime been as high as it is today. Arrests have halved in a decade.
And she said passing the vast majority of the cost of dealing with that to council taxpayers was perverse and unfair.
Because instead of a calculation based on demand, on rising crime, on population, on vulnerability, the only determination this is based on is local house prices. Once again, the Minister is at the dispatch box announcing cuts from central government funding and trying to dress them up as good news. I'm afraid no one is falling for it.
Once you take account of inflation and also the increased pension costs and funding, that there isn't a real increase in government funding for police forces.